Welcome to the NABS podcast. NABS is the support organisation for those working in advertising, marketing and media. I'm your host, Louise Scody. Each week I'll be chatting with someone from our industry to find out how they support themselves and those around them through challenging times as well as the day-to-day. And it's all to help you support your own mental wellness. I can't wait to start chatting. Sue Todd joined NABS as CEO in April 2022, following a varied 25 years with well-known brands from across the sector. Sue was previously CEO of Magnetic Media, the marketing body for the UK's magazine industry, and before that, Sue ran her own brand and culture consultancy, Wonder, which supported businesses across Adland with transformation and cultural change briefs to maximise employee and business potential. Sue is chair of the All In Mental Health Committee, and she's an active member of both the Time To Steering Committee and WACL. Sue tries to practice what she preaches by living a work-life balance, so on her time off, she's often to be found at the theatre, cycling or meditating. Sue is the proud mum of one teenage daughter and one dog. Who is easier to manage?
The child, definitely. The dog's much harder. He's a nightmare. He's not here today, thankfully.
Yeah, sometimes we do have pets on the podcast, my own included. So it's good to know at least one has been cancelled out. So obviously, I'm going to preface this by saying Sue is my boss. So in no way is this awkward. It'll be fine. But we wanted to get you on for ages. And because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, it seemed like a really great time to get you on and have a chat, because you are, in many ways, you're leading the flagship for mental wellness in the industry. You're the head of the organisation that's supporting the mental wellness of everybody. So I think it's really important that we have this chat and explore where you are with mental wellness. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thought you'd never ask.
So let's get straight into it. Can you tell us about a mental wellness challenge that you have had to face?
Yeah. So I think I've been very fortunate that for a good 40 years of my life, I considered myself to be incredibly mentally well. Didn't have any challenges really. No one around me did. And I guess I took that a little bit for granted. About 10 years ago, after I suddenly, almost overnight, started suffering from anxiety, which I didn't really recognize, couldn't really understand. It resulted after a few weeks in a bit of a panic attack and alerted me to the fact that I needed to kind of work out what was going on. It didn't take me too long to piece together that I think it was driven by some hormonal changes and that I was perimenopausal just because of some other symptoms and some reading I did. However, the journey to get the right help did take a long time. So it was a good couple of years of exploring with different doctors and privately how to get the right help. So in the meantime, I took the drugs, I took SSRIs, I took some time off work, I went to therapy, and I pretty much delved into trying to figure out as much as I could about what was going on with my body and my mind. So it was incredibly challenging actually for a good year, trying to almost pretend it wasn't happening from a work point of view until I could no longer do that. And I decided that both, from a sort of senior leadership point of view, but also just from a kind of self-care point of view, I was going to talk to my boss at the time about it, and I did, and they responded very well, and I had a little bit of time off work, and it helped me regain some balance. So I guess ever since then, I've been a bit of a junkie on the subject. I read everything I can about it. It's not just driven by perimenopause, but just, essentially how to take care of our minds and our bodies better, and to be a bit more aware of when changes happen, what the possible strategies and solutions are to help you get back on balance. So it's nice to now be in a job at NABS where that's pretty much 100% of what I spend my time doing, even though, I was pretty passionate about it in my last job. And for the last 10 years, I've been personally very interested in trying to learn as much as I can about the subject.
How are you feeling now that you're kind of on the other side of the really low bit of perimenopause and you've established your self-care and medication routine?
I mean, my biggest insight about the whole experience is, and I knew this at the time, I realised how privileged, lucky I was that I had a good boss. I had resources. I went private and paid for some help. That way, I was reasonably capable of absorbing a lot of information. I was pretty confident in pushing back on some of the medical establishment. So I knew even when I was in it that I was in a reasonably privileged position. And all I remember thinking is, goodness, I'm finding this a real struggle to get through it with the right help, to get back on balance. It's taking a long time and I have a lot of resources. How do people who haven't got resources do this? So it really opened my eyes to how hard and long it can be to get the right help and support, even if you're trying your absolute best and pushing and have, substantial resources, i.e., lots of friends, a good employer, some financial ability to buy services. So even with all of that, it was still incredibly difficult to manage and to get to a good place. And it took quite a long time. So I have huge amounts of sympathy and support for anybody who is struggling in any of those ways, not just through perimenopause. And that's why I am so passionate that, charities like NABS and other organisations like WACL and, businesses themselves do need to lean in to offer that level of support for people because, you don't really want anybody to ever take that long to get back on balance or to get unstuck. It's not ideal for it to take years. You really want to find ways to help people in weeks and months rather than years, ideally. So, that's why I'm such an advocate for there being resources made available to everyone, I guess.
You're also super happy talking about the perimenopause, which I think is great role modeling, which I think is part of it as well. I think you'd been at NABS for about 5 minutes when you were talking about eating a Twix at the petrol station because you were having a perimenopause moment. And you've spoken to quite a few of us one-on-one in a bit more in-depth, less chocolate-based manner about how you've gone about getting support,
Yeah.
including meditation.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
this
that's
is what brought you to
part of what,
meditation.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I started doing. I started sort of just paying more attention to my own mind and body. I think you kind of have to when you experience something like that. And all the stuff that, you'd read about and you'd heard about from other people about the importance of sleep and the importance of diet and the importance of exercise and the role that alcohol can play, sometimes negatively, all came to the fore for me. So I do pay attention to all of those things much more than I did 10 and up until 10 years ago. But I'm also much more aware of my own mind. Did a little course on mindfulness about a few years ago, an 8-week introduction course. And I'm a little bit of a neuroscience sort of junkie anyway. So it kind of suited me to sort of delve into that space. Although I was entirely skeptical about the actual meditation bit, having tried before and thought it was all a bit too woo-woo for me. But the more I understood about the science and the more I've understood and learnt, I guess, just about the value of paying attention to your own thinking, the more benefit I've got from it. So it's lesser sit on the cushion like a guru in some transcendental state for me, having not achieved that really and not being probably consistent enough at the practice. But it is about, trying to separate myself from my thinking and pay more attention to the helpful or unfelt helpful nature of your own thoughts. Because your kind of brain's just doing its thing, thinking ahead about potential problems or analysing the past. And really, it's often not very helpful. So I've kind of managed to just pay a bit more attention to that. That's how meditation and mindfulness have helped me. Because I sort of fundamentally believe, without sounding too Buddhist about it, that, the quality of your mind kind of determines the quality of your life. So I'm trying my best to practice that daily because I have seen some benefits.
But that's what NABS is all about. And that's what Mental Health Awareness Week is all about as well. That ultimately it starts with the mind and that's your foundation for a better life, essentially. One question about perimenopause, menopause support before we go into a bit more about Mental Health Awareness Week. So for anyone listening, if you could give them one practical takeaway about how they could support a team member or a direct report who's going through perimenopause, they're really struggling, what's something really tangible that you can do to support and to help?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is check whether you have a menopause policy in your organisation, because lots of work has happened in our industry in the last 5 years, I'd say, many organisations driven by bodies like WACL as well, who've been advocating for change in this area, have adopted and got menopause policies. So I think it's worth knowing if you have one. And I think it's worth asking HR or your boss if you haven't, whether we should have one. So I think that's quite important. But also, I think my top tip when you're trying to uncover what's going on and potentially find solutions is to keep some sort of journal or download one of the apps I think they exist to track symptoms, both physical and how you feel. Because, I'm on a WhatsApp group with a load of my female friends called 34 Symptoms. And, we've been on the perimenopause journey together, sharing woes and stories and symptoms and fun times. And the very nature of the fact that there are, I think some websites say there's 40 symptoms, but there's multiple ways you can experience perimenopause, and genuinely, it can be very different for people. Some people sail through and some people have a very, very difficult time. So I think keeping some sort of journal or recording on an app how you're feeling and what's happening to you can be really helpful. I think it helps find potential strategies that can help, but I also think it's useful when you want to try and unpick, well, is this just life, is this just my job, is this just because I've got 3 kids, is this just because I didn't sleep well last night, what is this? And the truth is it's quite hard to pinpoint exactly what's causing what, but it helps if you can look back over a few weeks or a few months and track what's been going on. It makes it easier with the medical profession, but from a workplace point of view, it also maybe helps you identify if there's particular aspects of work that are harder for you now while you're going through this transition, and it makes it an easier conversation to potentially have with your HR team or your boss.
Absolutely. I have to say, since I've been slathering on the HRT in the morning, I get less angry at less people. But that's just for
Yes.
me. Everyone's on their own journey. Now, it is Mental Health Awareness Week, and the theme this year is community, which is a subject you are very passionate about. So, can you tell us a bit about how NABS has been honing in on community and maybe a couple of the activities we've got lined up that are very community focused?
Yeah. Okay. When I arrived at NABS, I knew about NABS because I'd been in the industry for 25 odd years, but until 3 years ago, I had no idea the depth and range of services that were fully on offer from NABS. And in my first 90 days, I wanted to experience and understand as much about the product and the service as I could. And I had a bit of a penny drop moment, I think, in my first couple of months when I attended a number of our workshops. I think it was the Confidence and Gravitas one that was the first one I did. And it was a real eye-opener to me that not only was there a high-quality conversation, set of insights from the trained coach or facilitator therapist, I think, that was running the module that, I kind of expected to be good. There was, because of the nature of how NABS operates and the charity part of our offer being pretty much, 12 to 15 strangers together on these workshops, I quite quickly realised that actually the magic of NABS wasn't just the content, it wasn't just the trainers, it wasn't just the skills and the insights that were being shared. It was actually the community and the connection with the other people from the industry. Because not only does it help you get other ideas and learn from other people who might have experienced similar or, things to you, it also helps you see that you're not alone and it's not just your part of the world or your age group or your gender or your work experience or life experience that's creating havoc or causing you a problem or is something you want to improve, but actually these are often very common challenges or growth areas. So I think that is NABS's magic, because we are across the whole industry. So I think sitting in a room with a freelancer and a creative agency and someone from ad tech and someone from publishing is really validating and helpful. And I think trying to leverage that a bit more within NABS where appropriate, because obviously some people come to us and need individual help and support. And, we would always offer that, and we would never insist or ask them to go and be part of something with a group. But where it is appropriate, I think there is real value in learning together and from each other. And that's what we've been trying to leverage a bit more over the last couple of years. And some of the ways we've been doing that are offering more group therapy where appropriate. We've put on some more, we've called them Explore and Connect sessions, where group therapy and group coaching's on offer around particular issues or themes that we're picking up or around in the industry. And they've been really successful, I think, in both allowing people quite quickly to air some views about maybe something that's going on geopolitically or something specific to the industry, whether it was through the financial crisis or whether it's through something that's going on, from a geopolitical standpoint, and share their thoughts and hear from others, and sometimes even just leave those sessions with another connection or burgeoning friendship. So I think that's a really important part of how we all stay well. And we've been doing more and more of that as we've developed the NABS offer and accommodated actually more of the demand that's been coming our way over the last few years.
I remember reading a piece of feedback from one of our participants who went to the session about concerns about the global situation. And they said they didn't say anything. They didn't feel confident enough to contribute, but they had a lot of comfort being with
Right.
people and realizing they weren't alone in worrying about the state of the planet. So there's definitely something to be said for having access to community, even if you're not necessarily someone who feels like they want to talk in that space,
Yeah,
which I found
totally. And
very
I think
interesting.
that's the same with, I think, things like Walk and Talk, which is our sort of burgeoning newest fundraising event, which is on the 10th of July this year, and involves pretty much teams of 15 from across the industry walking together for the morning across a beautiful part of London. And again, some of that can just be, I'm coming out for a walk. I don't need to talk. I just value, coming out and having 3 or 4 hours away from my desk. Some of it can be, I really want to go out with my own team and just, reflect and take some time away from the day to day. And some aspect of it can be really fancy, meeting up and connecting and walking and having a catch up with some other people from the industry. So I think you're right. I think it's not necessarily forcing connection or, assuming that everybody wants community or to talk about everything. But, I think making that more available and creating spaces, whether they be sort of therapeutic or workshop spaces or just a stroll in a park, and giving people the opportunity to do that if they so want to, I think is really beneficial, because there's less opportunity to do that in our industry than there probably was 20 years ago. So I think, and especially if you're newer to our industry, I think it is particularly helpful just to connect with other parts and to, build where appropriate, a community of people who are like-minded or working on the same things as you are. So yeah, I think it's a really important part of what we do.
It's a really interesting point, actually, because let's say when you came into the industry, there would have been social events left, right, and center, and people were meeting each other from across the industry just naturally. Like you'd go to the office, you'd have your mates there, and then you'd all go out and you'd meet, whatever clients, other agencies. And because of everything that's happened over the past few years, our lives not structured like that anymore. But kind of filling an interesting space by creating these events and making these opportunities happen for people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they still happen. I think they happen less. I think you're right. I think that, COVID, hybrid, and just I think the nature of probably less. I mean, let's be honest. I'm so old that probably, every Thursday and Friday people went to the pub. So, just the fact that although that's still, part of how we socialize and part of what certainly lots of businesses do, it's not quite as ubiquitous as it once was. So I think, yeah, that the opportunity to just kind of meet with others in different spaces in different ways. And sometimes it can be through more formal things like mentoring programs, which obviously we do a lot of, as do WACL, as do MIFA. There's a lot of opportunity actually that's more intentionally about community than there was 10, 15 years ago, which I think is good. And the success of all those organisations and NABS's events does show there's a need for it and there's a desire for it, because, I know that MIFA and WACL and Bloom are all running some level of community engagement, and there's plenty of people who are signing up and going to them. So there's clearly a need and a desire, and it obviously helps people, I think, tremendously.
Absolutely. Now, you've been at NABS for just over 3 years, which has flown by. What are your observation about, as an industry, where we're at with mental health support, mental health awareness, and how can we all join forces to keep getting better and better at this?
I think we are, actually. I think my biggest observation about what's changed probably in the last 5+ years, maybe since COVID actually, is that we are better at joining together and working together. So I think, the All In survey, which means every 2 years, there's a lot of data around how we're doing as an industry on all sorts of metrics, but obviously within that also how people are feeling about mental wellness, stress, anxiety is incredibly helpful, because that sort of census level of data means we don't have to do that. That's brilliant that the AA and the industry invest in that, and we can all benefit, and we can work with them on making sure that some of the NAB's products and services evolve to best fit the changing needs of the industry. Same with the IPA, the People First initiative that has been going for the last couple of years. That really helps, I guess, gather together and audit what individual companies are doing that looks like best practice. So again, that helps us make sure we can fill spaces where other people aren't doing things. So I think that level of collaboration is much better than it's ever been. I think the places where we could still get better, probably on things like coordination of events. I think the window for putting on activity seems to be shorter and shorter every year in our industry. And so, we could probably coordinate a little bit more to make sure we don't ask people to try and do the same sorts of things over, the same sorts of weeks in July, for instance. But, the reality is I think we are better at that than we have been. And I think that is as a result of COVID, and it is as a result of everybody prioritising mental health more, I think, and everybody having better intentions to offer services or to share best practice in a constructive way. So yeah, that's probably one of the best things that's come out of more collaboration and more working together across the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say on an individual level, I've noticed that more senior people are coming forwards and talking about their own experiences. And I think that's really healthy. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that really helps. It really helps people to hear what others have experienced and how they've maybe overcome difficulties. I think the real challenge with the topic of mental health and sharing experiences is that it's hard to share them when you're in them. It's hard to
Yeah.
share them when you're struggling. It's hard enough almost to admit to yourself and to maybe a colleague or a boss, or outside help that you need help. It's often very difficult to share with the wider industry at that moment in time. But I think the more people talk about the fact that they may have had an experience that could happen again, or, is something that on an ongoing basis, they continue to monitor, then the better, because, clearly it does destigmatize it. But yeah, often we share when we've overcome something, which although that has a value, I do worry a little bit that it kind of, if you're in it when you hear that someone else, and you're struggling when someone else has overcome it, I think it can be helpful, but I think it can also sometimes, what you need is somebody at that time to empathize with you. And that often is one-to-one help rather than some sort of broadcast
Yeah.
message. But yeah, all of these things help. It's just, I don't think it's the only way to help people, obviously.
No, absolutely. And if you are struggling with something at the moment, then a great thing to do is to call the advice line at NABS, where you can have that one on one, confidential, empathetic conversation that you're talking about, Sue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, 100%. That's what people do, and that is the way to, if you want, as I say, a confidential conversation. That is definitely, the access point into NABS and the access point to some of the other services. So yes, definitely, the advice line is, core to what we do.
One of the most significant initiatives we've introduced at NABS during your time here is the Managers Mindsets program, which we've spoken about a lot on the podcast. We produced this in response to our All Ears community consultation, which we released in October 23, where overwhelmingly the industry told us that managers were the key to mental wellness and that they needed more support and more training to help people with their mental wellness and also to help with their own as well. In the course of doing this work, what have you discovered about your own management style? And what are a few tips that you can share with us about management for mental wellness?
That's a really interesting question. I think one of the things I definitely learned is that I think the job of management is harder now than it was when I first embarked on it, how many years ago. I think the breadth of what we ask of managers is greater. I think it's a harder job. And I think, well, we know from evidence that we've got through the All Ears survey that people get less support, that training is to be a good manager is minimal. in lots of businesses. So we know people are getting less help and we know the job's possibly harder. So I think we've got a bit of a perfect storm there. So I think it's crucial that we acknowledge that and that we, as we have, put on expertise and insight that can help people do that job well. But I also think it's important that we recognise how hard it is to do that job well. I think, that with evidence again has shown us that people at that level do struggle with their own mental wellness. And I think making sure we don't lay the blame for solving all of the organizations or people's individual problems lays at their door. We want to tool managers up so that they can recognize in themselves and in others there might be people struggling, and signpost and know how to have the conversation to get people the right help. We don't expect managers to be counselors and coaches, but I think there's an element of it's incumbent on any of us who manage people to have some basic skills, I think, around paying attention to people and looking for signs of where they might be struggling and feeling confident to have that conversation, and then making sure we have enough awareness about possible services and solutions to help signpost and push the person forward in the right way, with their consent, obviously. So I think that's the biggest insight, that it's got harder and people are getting possibly less help than they used to become brilliant managers, and it is a really key role. So I think it's a little bit like being a parent where, to a certain extent, you need to tool up and pay attention, but you also just need to make sure there's a culture and an environment where people feel they can speak to you and that, it's safe to talk to your boss. That's probably the most important thing. And I think for me personally, I think you're never, ever too old to learn new ways of doing things. I think we can sometimes assume, if we've been managing people for a long time, that people are people and human behavior is human behavior, and if you've been doing it a long while, you've got it nailed. But I think it is, work is different, and you have to, I think, as a leader and manager, be aware of the fact that there are different pressures and different needs, and some of the things that you might have thought was good practice 10 years ago might not be as appropriate now, or might need to evolve your own thinking. So I think just keep yourself open to, the basic principles of creating an environment where people feel safe and open to talk to you. Tool up on the latest training around things like spotting if people are struggling, and keep your mind open to self-improvement if you manage people, because you've never nailed it, a bit like you've never nailed parenting, I don't think.
No, I certainly haven't nailed it, and I've got a long way to go. But there is something to be said for people who aren't just managing at work, but they come home and they're managing their kids, and they're managing their partner, and they're managing their pets, and it's just manage, manage, manage. Where's the time for you?
Well, you got to make some. That's the key, isn't it? It's the old oxygen mask and all that. So you got to make some, even if it's a very small amount of time every day, even if it's, commute and journeys and dog walks and whatever it is that works for you. Then I think that's the challenge for most of us. I think most of the people I talk to feel that, work and life is just too full, and, there's not much slack in the system, so to speak. And I think, that's the danger point if that's sustained for people and the pressure around that's too high. So it's very hard to do, but I think trying to carve out some time for pause and reflection and switch off and whatever it is that kind of floats your boat in that area, whether it is, a dog walk, a bike ride, 10 minutes of meditation, whatever it is, a podcast, a book. I think it is really key because, we know our brains don't work effectively when they're on at 100 miles an hour for, 8, 10, 11, 12, 15 hours a day. We know that's not sustainable. So I think time for reflection and a little bit of time out for yourself is absolutely crucial.
Agree. And it doesn't have to be trying to find an hour in the day. You can do 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Arguably, that's more effective.
Yeah, totally.
To keep having those
little
something that works for you. Points.
And a bit of a habit. It's the old James Clear habit forming stuff. Find something that you can wrap into your work and it becomes, wrap into your life and day that becomes easy to do. And, that habit will form. And then it doesn't become, you don't have to be quite as intentional about it after a few weeks and months. It becomes part of what you do. Like brushing your teeth.
Exactly. James Clear, Atomic Habits. Half the NABS team are obsessed with this book. I will post a link in the show notes, along with everything else that we've spoken about so far. So, is there anything that you started doing management wise that maybe you didn't do when you started at NABS? And working at NABS has kind of brought a new element to how you manage people or approach
Mm.
management?
I think the thing that I didn't have as much experience, knowledge, insight about was probably things like neurodiversity. So although, I'd like to think that I have always treated people as individuals and believed that, your job as a manager is to understand the needs, motivations, quirks, strengths, for every individual who you're with, and that no one person, needs to be treated exactly the same as another. I don't think until I came to NABS, I had enough understanding of the breadth of some of those needs based on the different ways that people think and the different way that people's brains are wired, I suppose. So I think that's probably the area that I know more about now, and I'm a little bit more sort of strategic about, hopefully, in terms of understanding the why. I think I've always been okay at spotting that people need and want different things and work in different ways. But I guess now I'm a little bit more informed and probably a little bit more confident to think about and possibly have a conversation with people if they're happy to about, why and what it is that they need. That might be different based on, could be a diagnosis. They could have, ADHD and know they've got ADHD, but it could just be, it's a slightly broader conversation about the way they process, the way they manage energy, what gets a good performance out of them, what sort of environment helps them work in the most productive way, what drains them. So I think that conversation is definitely, I hope I've got more informed about that since I've been at NABS, because that's been something that I've learned more about. And I think on the whole, I think we are as a society getting much better understanding about accommodating difference, and knowing the why, not just sort of seeing that, what we probably used to think was just that's just the way they are, they're just a bit different. But I think we're getting better at and more confident at thinking, well, that means we have to possibly manage them or organize things in people in different ways, which and just accommodating difference, I think, in a much more structured way, which I think is a challenge, because I think at the center of lots of business leaders sort of minds, at the front of my mind, is how do you create enough cultural glue and enough commonality and enough consistency for the team in the broadest possible sense to be effective, whilst also accommodating difference. And I think finding the sweet spot on that is quite hard to do, but it's quite an important job as a leader to try and understand where you can ask for consistency, because that helps with collaboration and it creates good boundaries and it creates fairness, but also how you can expand the way work is for people to accommodate difference.
Yes, it's an ongoing project, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a really interesting one. And I think anyone who says they've got all that stuff nailed, well, get them on the podcast, because I'd love to hear from them. But,
I will
I
do.
think it is an ongoing project. And I think it's a really interesting one, and one that we should have honest conversations about not having nailed, because I think on a day-to-day basis, it's hard to get the balance of those things right, to create sticky cultures where shared values and principles can be bought into by everybody, whilst as we diversify our workforces and as we look to accommodate difference, we're able to expand and contract the ways that we work with people and flex it to get the best possible individual and collective performance. I think it is a really difficult thing to continuously get right. But I think as long as we keep talking about it collectively and with individuals, we'll continue to get better at it. But, I think it's a really interesting part of modern work.
How does the advertising community lift you up? It's going to be something about community.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's kept me in this industry for so long is the fact that I think our biggest strength is I think we've got a collective desire for self-improvement that I think is really powerful in our industry. I think it's, we talk about the fact that we're often, the pace of change is really high and we're a little bit attracted to novelty and change and driving things forward in a very kind of fast way, which I think is also true. I think it's the nature of the sector and media and advertising that we're at the forefront of change. And I think it is incredibly fast, and that can have consequences that are sometimes difficult for people. But I also think it's inherently what's attractive about the collective consciousness of advertising media, because I think we're always trying to do better. So I don't think it means we always get it right. And I think we should be very open and honest about when we get it wrong, which is sometimes hard to do. But I think there's like a excitement about being better in our industry, which I think is why I've stayed in it for such a long time, because, growth, self-improvement, being better, being faster, doing things 9 out of 10 rather than 7 out of 10, all of that mentality to be great at stuff and to be successful. As long as it doesn't get in the way of ever doing anything wrong, or being open to trying new things and getting 3 out of 10, or predicating people feeling that they can't admit when they've struggled or failed, then there's something incredibly attractive about the sort of, I think the industry's desire for self-improvement is my favorite thing about it.
Yeah. You definitely have to keep having a desire to learn and grow to make the most out of life, is my philosophy. And I think lots of people in our industry.
I agree. And totally accepting that 6 out of 10 is okay. Sometimes it's enough.
Yeah.
And you can definitely score a 2. Obviously, you don't want to score too many 2 out of 10s. And, you have to manage, risk in the appropriate way, depending on the project and the importance of what you're doing. But, the reality is everything's not going to be 10 out of 10 the first time you try it. And I think we have an industry that is okay with, pushing boundaries and trying new things. And I think that's what makes it so successful. And it definitely lifts me up to be around people who've got that attitude and are open to, admitting that they mess something up, and they'll go again and they'll try next time to do it better, and to share that, actually. So I think, going back to the question you asked me earlier about collaboration between different parts of the industry and how I thought on mental health there was more openness, I think that's part of the cultural change that's happened. I think although we're fiercely competitive in some ways as individual businesses and agencies and media owners, etc., the reality is we're also very good at coming together sometimes and being open about sharing good practice. So yeah, I love that part of our industry. I don't know if there's another industry like it. I mean, I haven't worked anywhere else, but from what I hear from friends and colleagues, I definitely sense that the energy around growth in our industry, from we can do it better, there's another way, we can try harder, is it's contagious, I think. And as I said, as long as it doesn't push into something that becomes debilitating for people, or we don't allow people to stick their hands up in that culture and say, I can't go as fast as that, or that's too much for me at the moment, or I need to step away from that, then it's broadly, I think, a positive way to positive part of our industry, as long as we catch people or allow people to stick their hands up to say this is too much. That's the important balance, I guess.
Somehow we have got to the end of this interview. It has flown by. I have one more question for you. What's one
Okay.
thing you've learned about how to support yourself?
I think, gosh, it's so hard, because it's, I really believe that you need a lot of different strategies to keep yourself on balance. But if I had to prioritize one thing over everything else, it would be sleep. Sleep is, so critical. I think we're learning so much more about why we sleep, how we sleep, the value of sleep to long-term disease and Alzheimer's and all sorts of things. But on a really kind of selfish micro level, I'm a much nicer, better person on 7.5, 8 hours sleep than on 5.5, 6 hours sleep. And I think maybe this is partly age or partly just understanding myself better. That's one of the things that I try to fiercely protect. But yeah, as I said earlier, I think paying more attention to your own mind and your own responses and the way you think is kind of my other strategy for trying to stay sane and on balance and to move forward as positively as I can.
So it has been an absolute pleasure to finally interview you.
Thank you so much. It's been a total honour. Thank you.
Thank you.